Hi everyone, this is Autisocial, a channel where I'm going to discuss things related to autism, social justice, social issues, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be the first video today, so that's exciting. I'm going to talk about being autistic in law school and some tips and tricks I have, given that I was autistic in law school and I kind of suffered through because I didn't have accommodations, and therapists hadn't suggested I might be autistic at that time yet, so I was kind of struggling, but hopefully I can provide some helpful tips and tricks. And before we get started, please say hello to Renalda the Yeti and Kara the cat. Okay, yay! Okay, so my first suggestion is before school starts, try to go to your disabled student services. They're gonna help you get accommodations. So the most common accommodations that I know people got related to mental health was getting extra time on tests and papers, or getting different settings to take tests, like without bright lights and without as much sound. So that's an accommodation that I know that is very common and easy to get. Well, all of those are pretty common and easy to get. The next accommodations that I have thought of are less common, but I think still they seem pretty reasonable to me. So if anybody watches this and wants to try, and if law schools watch, I think all of these are very reasonable, and hopefully that could maybe push things in the right direction. These are all kind of related to speaking as well, because speaking is a big part of law school, and a lot of autistic people can struggle with it. So a big thing in law school is called cold calling. In law school, they like to give special terms to things to make you feel intimidated and or like a part of an in-group and feel a little self-important. But anyway, it just means that the professor is going to call on random students to brief the case for that day, and you kind of won't know when you will be called, so you have to kind of prepare every day, thinking that you might be called on. And so, yeah, it's kind of intimidating, and one possible accommodation I thought of, or set of accommodations, basically has to do with cold calling and taking it a little bit slower for autistic students. So one way I thought, one possible accommodation could be recording yourself going through a case brief instead of doing the cold calling in class. Doing cold calling in office hours, well, it would basically probably be just you and the professor, or you and the professor and a couple other students. So it wouldn't be as intimidating to go through the whole case that way instead of in front of the entire class. And yeah, the last possible accommodation would be kind of a combination of those, especially if you want to do litigation and you do really want to focus on your speaking skills in particular. Maybe you could start that first semester doing, like video case briefs, and then that second semester you could try during office hours, and then maybe your 2L year you could try doing cold calling in maybe your smaller classes, and then your 2L year second semester you could just do kind of like that regular cold calling. So you are kind of working up to it, but you're taking it in more reasonable chunks. The next accommodations I was thinking about had to do with the amount of cases that you are responsible for. So, well, for me, I'm a bit of a slower processor, and for me to make sense of things, I pretty much have to get the entire picture. and for all the details to like fit into place. And it's not as though that isn't how law school works, but there is just so much material that you kind of don't get that entire picture until the very end of the semester. And basically in law school, they do this because they want to get you used to a very fast-paced environment. They're going to assume that you're going to be working in a firm where there is a ton of work and you have to, read a lot of cases, things like that, which isn't necessarily the case for everyone, but that's kind of, it's a professional school, so that's how it's designed. And the other thing about law school is it's all about the application, so you're going to be tested on novel situations where you're going to apply the rule and the exceptions to the rule, and it's basically how you apply it to this scenario or scenarios that your professor comes up with. So my possible accommodation to help assist with like the amount of work is having you be responsible for just a smaller set of cases, because I think for me it actually was detrimental to me to be responsible for the normal amount of cases. I think I actually learned less that way, just because I was getting so bogged down in all of the details that I was not getting the whole picture. And one thing I think could help with this would be maybe you're responsible for one case regarding a particular rule, and then your professor can help you with like those exceptions, maybe in office hours, where they basically do tell you the main takeaways that you are responsible for. So you're still getting that experience briefing a case and reading a case and trying to take out those main, rules and takeaways, but your professor is helping you a little bit with the amount of work. And again, I think this could be done in sort of like a gradation, as I was saying with like the cold calling speaking accommodations, where maybe you're responsible for a certain number of cases your 1L year, and then you're responsible for all the cases your 2L year and 3L year, or a third of the cases your 1L year, 2/3 of the cases your 2L year, and then all the cases your 3L year. Any variation like that. Okay, so my next set of tips, it's not about accommodations specifically, but I will frame them with autism in mind, although they'll be helpful to anybody regardless. But yeah, my first tip is read the cases, because yeah, it's just super important. Maybe in college you didn't have to read or prep before class, but in law school it is super important, just because of the amount of material you're getting. So I'm likely autism level 1. That's what a couple of therapists have told me. I'm still waiting on my formal eval, but related to the autism part of it, like I was saying previously, I can get bogged down in the details, and it doesn't make sense to me until I get the whole picture. Because there are so many details and so many cases that you're going to be responsible for, and just the amount of information coming at you is unlike anything in your previous schooling experience. I would say reading the cases is very, very, very important, especially for us autistics who maybe haven't had maybe many issues in school, and maybe that's why some of us are undiagnosed for so long. But yeah, read the cases. It's super important. Some professors give practice questions as well, and I would say definitely do those too, because those can be super, super, super helpful for the final exam. You'll get your professor will come up with different scenarios, and it'll help you apply the law, which is basically what you're learning to do in law school. Another thing is go to office hours. Sort of similar to the accommodations I was suggesting, like some of them involved going to office hours. This is a good way to get your professor in a less overwhelming environment with fewer people, and it's a good place for you to go where you can ask more specific questions. There is only so much time to answer questions in class, and you can even ask your professor if you're briefing the cases correctly and things like that. It's super important to kind of get those skills down as quickly as possible. I'd also say review your class notes after class, because like I said, there's just so much information. It can easily be overstimulating. So the more that you can repeat to yourself those kind of main takeaways that you learned in class, the better you're going to be for the final. And similarly, there's this thing called outlining, because in law school, most tests are open note, and you can kind of, they want you to use the main takeaways and, the law that you learned in class on the final. It's not about memorizing anything, it's about applying. And so you want to start outlining early, and that'll help you repeat the information too, and not get so bogged down in the amount of information as well. In law school, a lot of people form study groups, even more than in, probably your undergrad. It's sort of a thing to do in law school, but for autistic people specifically, I would recommend still doing the study group, just because I'm repeating myself a lot at this point. But there is a lot of information, and it can be very dizzying to try and apply the law, because there's this application, this different application, this different application, this exception to the rule, this other exception to the rule. And it can be very dizzying when you're trying to work everything out. And so it can be very helpful to have someone else to bounce your questions off of when you're going over those specific areas in the law throughout the semester. So I would recommend still doing it. For me, throughout most of my school, I was very much an independent worker, and so I was in law school as well. I also tried some study groups, but they were bigger, and so people got distracted, and we were having fun and things like that, and it was less about the actual studying. But I would recommend, if you are trying to focus on your studies, try and pick maybe one other person who you can do kind of a study group with, and it's just you two. Someone else who is pretty focused, and you can both bounce your questions off of each other. Okay, so my next tip is to try and keep your focus on why you came to law school, what your goals are, and try to drown out a lot of the overwhelming competitive energy that can be in the school. Unfortunately, law school can be a very competitive environment, and it can bring out some of the worst in people. It definitely brought out sides of me that I'm not proud of, but my advice for this is just try and excuse yourself from any conversations as quickly as you can. Just say you need to study or whatever when it starts to go that direction. For instance, people will say what's your internship this summer? Have you gotten callbacks from any of your interviews yet? What's your job after law school? how are things going at OCI? Are you going to this public interest organization after law school? Are you going to this government organization after law school? What's your 2L internship like? What are your grades? Are you worried about finals? Yada, yada, yada. It can be very just overwhelming. And it might not even necessarily be coming from like a bad place from people. It's just a lot of people are type A and anxious and about all these things too. But yeah, my advice is to just try and avoid this as much as you can, and try and get to know your classmates as whole people too. You know, don't always steer the conversation to law school. My next tip is to have a lot of outside support, or keep your outside supports before law school. I'd recommend getting your meds adjusted. I'm still in that process, and it's not as though you might not need them readjusted during law school because it's a very stressful environment. But I think if you can go in with your meds mainly adjusted, go in with a therapist lined up, keep your outside supports, because like I said, people in law school can have a tendency to just talk about law school, and that can just be very stressful and overwhelming. And you still want to have a life outside of law school. Also, if you can get yourself into a really good self-care routine, that is super important. When I was in law school, I just neglected myself a lot, and I was really burned out. But one way to prevent autistic burnout is actually to do your self-care, which is, I know, the last thing you want to do when you're burned out. But if you can get into that routine before law school, and so you're thinking less about it, I think that's one good way to prevent burnout. This kind of ties together the last 2 points, but law school is a stressful environment, and they will tell you, you know, probably your first week or so that it is a professional environment, but there will be social events and activities, of course, and the legal profession can be known for people having drinking problems and not managing their stress super well. So I think it is important to keep that in mind, that it is professional and you don't want to present yourself poorly in front of people who may be your coworkers in the future, or just people, you know, the profession's pretty small. So just manage your drinking if you can, and try and manage your stress in those like self-care ways, like I was just saying. This last thing is going to be about networking, because, you know, law school is a professional school, and the whole goal is to get you a career after you're done. And so networking is a big thing in law school, and I will try and find resources for networking while autistic specifically, because I'm not super great at this either. But at many schools there's something called OCI, or on-campus interviews. They happen before your 2L year, and they're for people who are interested in big law firms, or the top firms in the country, and they mainly work with corporate entities, and you'll do a lot of document review your first few years, but you can work your way up to partner, and you can make a lot of money, and a lot of people go this route. But yeah, there is a whole kind of networking event called OCI before your 2L year. I would say utilize your career center. They can definitely help you practice your networking skills. This goes for everyone, no matter what you're interested in. But my tips for autistic people specifically, it's a couple days, I think. I didn't go this route, but it's a couple days. So try and block out a couple days before and a couple days after where you're not socializing at all, because it's going to drain your social battery a lot. And like I was just saying, prep beforehand a lot with your career center. If you're not doing OCI and you want to go the way of a smaller firm, also called boutique firms, or you want to do public interest or government work, all of that requires a little bit of outside networking. either knowing people, knowing friends or family, outside research and kind of reaching out, cold emailing, things like that. Or a lot of schools have listservs where you can see people who used to go to the school and they might work in this public interest organization or this government organization, and you can kind of contact them and see how they were able to secure a job there. But yeah, it's just good to know that you'll have to probably do a little bit of extra outside work. And those are all my tips and tricks for managing autism in law school, so hope this was helpful. If you all are interested, I could also do one on being autistic before law school and the LSAT and applying and all of that. So yeah, and if you have any other questions in the comments, I will definitely answer. And okay, until next time, bye.